Welcome to Safe on Deck. For episode 49, I sat down with Ryan Rankin at his home in Pensacola, Florida. For episode 10, Ryan detailed his career as a Naval Aviator, flying the E-2C Hawkeye and the T-6A Texan II. But for episode 49, we took a deep dive into one of Ryan's three aviation-centric businesses: MACH METAL, PLANEORAMA, and Jedis. Jedis are unique, small-run, one-of-a-kind collectible tags made from scrap and retired aircraft components. During the podcast, we discussed the origin story of Jedis, how Ryan sources such unique aerospace materials, the tag design and manufacturing process, and we wrapped up by answering several collector questions. Ryan's a close personal friend, a gifted artist, and a highly skilled craftsman, and I'm a proud collector and customer of Jedis with both SR-71A Blackbird and U-2A Dragon Lady tags. Thanks as always for taking the time to listen. In the future, I plan to continue to share similar interviews with both current and retired military aviators. If you have a question or a suggestion for a future interview, please leave it as a comment below. Safe on Deck, episode 49 with Ryan Rankin and Jedis. Enjoy. Okay, Ryan, it's been a minute since we had the chance to sit down and chat. Last time we talked about your military aviation career, a little bit of civilian flying in there too, but we kind of deliberately left something big off the table we didn't discuss, and that's what we're here to talk about tonight. So tell me about Jedis.
It is a huge part of my life right now. I try to get my wife in here to sit down with me as well, and unfortunately she couldn't make it, but Mary's a huge part of this as well, and I think anyone who sent us an email, has heard from her. And so I'm kind of the face of Jedis, but additionally, there's a lot of folks, right? The artist, and Mary does all of our shipping and all the labeling and all that other stuff. And so I say other stuff, there's significant amount of work involved from the cutting and etching and printing and all that other stuff. And so Jedis is, again, I just want to communicate, first and foremost, that it's not just me.
How'd you get started? Where'd the idea come from to share this part of aviation with others?
Yeah, so when we were living out west, when I was stationed at Point Mugu in California, living in Malibu was incredible, surfing every morning before work. At the time, I was just newly getting into making furniture out of these airplane parts, and being out west, that's the place to be for a lot of the bigger boneyards, and was able to develop relationships out there with many people and got access to some of those locations and started buying things for these projects. And at the time, I was consigning things to some furniture galleries or studios in LA. That was going well. And, when I would go to these yards, I would buy things for specific projects, but then also if I came across something interesting, I would buy it as well for future projects. And that went on for years, just amassed this huge collection of things. And, I think more importantly, list of contacts and people that were into the same kind of stuff. And those relationships now are a big part of what we do here. On one trip to one of the boneyards, I forget which one, I came across a pile of 777 windows. Ironically, a buddy of mine had purchased some window frames, like window sections from one of the jets out there, and he left the windows behind and just said, I paid for them, you can have them if you want, we'll work out some trade or something in the future. I took them home and basically had them for a year or two, I think. After getting out of the Navy and a couple moves, ended up back in Pensacola, been carting these things around, and had a newer laser at the time, started cutting them up into tags. At the time, there was really nobody cutting up windows and making tags out of them, and that resonated with folks. So that was the first tag, and I think that was in late 2020 when we first started doing those with those 777 tags, and they are a wildly different thing than what we're doing now, but super proud of them, and that's how we got our start. Things have changed quite a bit since then.
For those that aren't familiar, what is an aircraft boneyard?
The boneyards are these magical places, some of my favorite places in the world. A lot of these places out west are used for movie folks, for filming and whatnot. So large collection of parts, and a lot of it's for sale, a lot of it's not. It's my favorite part of the process. I mean, it's treasure hunting, right? I've come across some wildly incredible stuff at these places. And so, the boneyards are these really neat places that have a bunch of old airplane carcasses. Some are more just look like a junkyard and you have to really pick through things. Some are complete fuselages, on wooden blocks, and it's pretty cut and dry what they have. I prefer the ones that are more, you have to dig, and rip holes in your jeans and that kind of stuff. So the boneyards are great, but definitely not my only source of material, but they certainly are a great place to really stock up if you need to.
So I'm guessing a lot of times you kind of go in knowing what you're going to find. Has there ever been a time that you've just been incredibly surprised or had this really cool find that kind of took you by surprise?
Yeah, airplane manufacturers make it hard. There's data plates oftentimes, and a lot of times they're incomplete or the type isn't there. I've developed develop this eye just based on, that's gunship gray, or knowing a color and understanding that, okay, I think that's this. And even just looking at the construction, like, okay, this is certainly like, this is low speed, this is high speed, and just kind of broad brush understanding what this is if I don't know offhand or the data plate isn't there. And then working through that, looking for part numbers. Yeah, that's always exciting. Even it ends up being something, maybe not super cool, high speed. It still is neat, satisfying understanding, oh, that's off of this, right? I was into instruments, and I used to rebuild cockpit instrument panels. That was a hobby of mine. I've done Vulcan and Phantoms, all kinds of neat stuff, and really enjoyed that aspect of finding the panel. That's where I'd start, and then filling it in with the proper instruments. It takes years, and there's always the one nobody can find. I was rooting around bins full of instruments, and I think I was looking for firelight covers for an F4 panel. Those are hard to find. These little like covers that go over like the fire warning lights. There's not many of them around. And so anyway, there was some F4 stuff, and I was like, just digging. I came across this stick, and it was at an aircraft boneyard. So, it looks like an aircraft stick, but it was very sort of rudimentary. It almost looked like it belonged in like a piece of like a construction equipment thing, or can't quite explain it. And it was orange. That's an interesting color for airplanes, right? Got me kind of excited. And so anyway, I bought it, and I got it home, and I was researching it to death, and I couldn't figure out what it was. I was looking at photos of old stuff, and I'm pretty familiar with cockpits. Like, that's just one thing that being a pilot, right? Like, that's your home, that's your nest, right? And so like instrument layout and sticks. And so I had this stick, and I was looking, I think a year or two went by, and I would just ever I'd see it, and I would research it. I'm like, nothing. Last year, I don't know how I got on it or how I found it, but I was looking at photos of old test stuff, and I came across this cockpit photo. It was in black and white, and I feel like I'd seen it before, but being black and white, the orange didn't stick out, and it was kind of a grainy old photo, and it was a picture of the M2 F1, which was a lifting body, like pre-shuttle, like test stuff, right? And there's the stick. When you read about the M2 F1, I think guys like Jaeger flew it, other really big names. So that was a pretty incredible thing to discover. The jet now, and this was at a boneyard, I think it was auctioned off at one point, like with a bunch of other stuff. The aircraft now is at the Edwards Test Museum. I don't know the history of the stick that's in there, if it's original to it. I don't know if there's more than one made, but it certainly is a unique item, and I've never seen another one like it. So yeah, this is one of those things, you come across, and that was a pretty neat treasure, to find.
Okay, Ryan, so we're talking about where these parts come from, but at a certain point, it's going to have to go from that piece of an F-16 into a beautiful tag. You're a guy that has to work in many mediums, aluminum, titanium, composite, whatever it might be. What are the tools you use to make the tags?
Step one is processing the material, and that's going to be done with grinders and cutters and torches and all kinds of other stuff. And there's a lot of art in that. And that really sets the foundation for how much work the tag's going to be after we cut it, and really even how interesting it's going to be. And so when we get the material, it's looking at it and, deciding, okay, here are the best colors, here are the stencils, here's the, the titanium exhaust area, and really trying to sort out what colors and what variants. And oftentimes you're having to really work to get some of that stuff, crawling inside the airframe to free some stuff up before, so you can loosen it up. And that takes time, and it's nasty and sweaty, and you're wearing all kinds of PPE. And I do enjoy that work, but I don't want to do it every day.
What's the toughest medium you've worked with? Was it that titanium that was really, really tough to cut through?
Some of the nickel alloys, the exhaust stuff is just, it's high temp. It really doesn't like to be cut. Super sparky. Throw sparks everywhere. Eventually it'll cut. If there's a lot of structure behind it, we just did this A37 wing, and man, that thing was a fight. I remember getting at the boneyard and like, how is this so heavy? I just thought it was full of water or something, right? Because it was buried. We got it back here and started cutting it, and like, no, it just is that heavy. And if you read about the Dragonfly, it was like twice the weight of the stock T37, and so they had to reinforce the wings, and like it was like two wings in one. There was multiple layers of wall inside of it, and we actually add this neat little bonus tag of some of that internal skin as a result. But yeah, that thing was the material. It's how the structure of the material, the more stuff there, the more difficult it is to work with. But we did an F100 titanium exhaust, processed that a couple months ago, and it was pretty thin and it was pretty straightforward. But some of the more structured stuff, it's just access and getting to it. But once you kind of figure out how things are built, you can deconstruct them. And that's another neat part of it, right? Is like when you're taking the stuff apart, really getting into the minds of the engineers and the designers, you really see how this stuff was put together and how it was designed, and some neat insight into the construction techniques. And I think people like those tags because, when you're holding the stuff that has rivets and fasteners and stuff, you feel like you're holding part of an airplane cutting the material, let alone the etching and the card and everything else. It tells a story and it communicates, to you what it is. Anyway, so step one is processing the material, and then we'll move on to cutting. And right now that's done exclusively with the metal on a abrasive water jet, and that's cut at 60,000 PSI. The machine mixes that high pressure water with garnet, and it'll cut anything up to 8 inches thick. And so we won't be making tags 8 inches thick, but the capabilities of the machine are pretty incredible. And so I just have to make things in-house, just who I am. I could have probably farmed the work out to other folks to cut it and done some stuff. I don't think there's anything wrong with that process, but for me as the maker, I just really need to do it here. And so getting the machine was a really big step for us as far as opening up doors to process new stuff. And so we cut on the water jet for metal. And then for the clear tags, the canopy tags, we'll cut those on a CO2 laser. And that's something that we've dialed in, I think. And it's a neat process. And those tags require quite a bit of work. There's a lot, probably more work than the metal, significantly more, because there's, the edges coming off those windows will have canopies, windscreens, will have like some sort of dust protective coating or something on them, and really leaves a lot of slag and artifact on the window itself. And so we have to really work to get that off and then polish the edge without adulterating the material too much, right? Like you kind of want to clean up the edges, but you don't want to remove too much. And with the clear tags, that's a fine line, right? And so we'll leave some of those, those scratches and that wear and that stuff on there, right? So yeah, that's how we cut the clear stuff. And then, final step between there, we'll finish the edges. Some will get polished, some won't, depending on the material. We'll make that decision. And then moving on to the actual, etching of the tag or printing of the tag. And that really is material dependent. The only tags we're really printing now are the canopy tags. And then with the A37, there is this really neat underside gray tag, and the A37 being camo, we thought it was a neat opportunity to do a color print. So we printed that tag, but the canopy tags, the clear tags, those we print, and that's like 6 to 7 layers of inks and special effects and gloss coats and stuff. And so the canopy tags require a bit of work, and the laser etching we'll do on either the CO2 laser or a fiber laser. It just depends on the material and, what type of etch we're after, and, from a contrast standpoint and depth standpoint. So another really important piece of equipment I mentioned a few minutes ago is the printer, and we use the printer it's a UV printer, and we use it for printing tags, and also we make the cards in-house now, cut those on the laser, and then print them here as well.
Okay, well, Ryan, I'm glad you mentioned the cards. And one thing I also definitely want to talk about, some of the original designs are incredibly beautiful, but you've got some updated ones kind of coming down the line. You talk about making them in-house. Hoping maybe you could kind of unpack that.
The artists we use primarily is BVR. We've worked with some other folks, Ryan Quickfall in the UK, and Tim Steiner, who's a former squadron mate of mine. And card art is a huge part of the package. Our new cards are redesigned. I'm just totally in love with the design, the layout, and how they look. And, now that we're making them here, I'm just super happy with everything, every part of them. Those text messages I get from the artists, working up to a release, are like, that's my unboxing experience, because I have a pretty good idea how the tag's going to look at that point, right? So not just draw an F-16 or an SR-71, it's like, what variant is it? Where are the antennas at, right? And getting all those details right. It's not just draw X, right? It's like, what was on the jet? What color was it painted? Was there anything special about it? And if we know the variant and even the serial number, like getting that info on there is important to us. And so, yeah, I think we're doing a great job there.
Well, Ryan, you mentioned the SR, so I can't let you get away without talking about that specific tag. It's my favorite of the ones that I have. Not only is it a piece of titanium, but it's a titanium spot weld, which anyone that knows anything about the SR and the history of the airplane, an incredibly important part of that manufacture. But maybe, could you tell me the story about the SR tag?
That was a great tag, one of my favorites as well. The SR-71, I don't need to go on about the airplane. It just doesn't yield a lot. I mean, for one, because the material is so precious, right? I mean, it's not something you can just go grab anywhere. And then in general, on how it was made, there just aren't these huge panels, right? It's not like other jets where there's just big chunks or, this or that. It just is, other than, some of the flight control surfaces, which aren't titanium, it just, there's not a whole lot of yield. And so you'll see smaller pieces, turn up. And that particular run off Bodo Express was one of the larger panels and had that neat red stripe on the side of it. And that we picked up from a private collector, and it was super popular. It's been sold out. That was, again, a lot of work went into processing that and cutting the back of the structure off in order to get it ready for cutting. And just a great tag, great history. Was able to speak with the pilot who flew it when it diverted into Norway. And yeah, just an awesome story, and love that we knew the history of the jet.
That titanium, CIA sourced it from the Soviet Union to process it in America to fly on a spy plane. I think about that every time I touch it. And kind of that process of cutting up history. Is there anything you won't cut up? Is there anything that's maybe, I don't know, too sacred that it maybe can't be shared as a tag?
I talked about it earlier with regards to having those connections, right, with airplanes. And, you know, the maintainers, I think, probably can understand where I'm coming from as well. I really like, when it comes to tags, dealing in components and parts, you know, versus, you know, entire airframes. And not just because they're easy to transport. I like that they've been removed from an aircraft that was probably in service at the time, and, you know, something else was put on there. And so I have this difficulty with cutting up complete aircraft, and not that it's wrong to do so. Personally, if I can see any hope in that airplane, you know, potentially being restored or put on display somewhere, I just want to leave it alone. Again, that's my own personal approach. I'm not saying it's the right approach or the wrong approach, but when it comes to, you know, going to the boneyards, you know, if I were to come across, you know, a whole airplane, man, I just couldn't do it. The only time I've considered that was if I knew an airplane was like literally going to be crushed the next day or the day after, and that was the case with the Coast Guard C-130 tag we did. That was literally a day or two before that thing got crunched, and so that was, you know, I felt good about that. But, you know, you've seen the stuff here, right? There's just some stuff that, you know, I think needs to be kept whole, a lot of stuff. And in fact, most stuff. I view my role as a tag maker as, you know, it's sort of a sacred thing for me. And, you know, I have my own rule book, you know, if you will, and a couple things, you know, that come to mind, you know, other than complete airplanes, you know, cockpits are one that I just struggle with. We have 3 A4s on the property now, and, you know, this most recent one that came in is beat up. But I look at it and, you know, you can just see all the date marks and the boneyard, you know, stenciling on it. And there's just so much history there. And I struggle because I want to communicate that and I want to share that with people in tags, right? But I also I look at that and I think, man, that just needs to be left alone. I just want to put it on a stand, because the dents and all the scratches and all that stuff, just, I don't know, it really is neat just to be around. And because you know, at one point that thing was, you know, launching off aircraft carriers and doing work. I personally just struggle with, you know, cutting stuff like that up. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff I don't cut up. You've been in my workshop. I mean, if I want to do a Concorde tag, I could really do a Concorde tag, right? And so, you know, there's just some stuff that it just needs to be kept whole.
Ryan, what makes Jet Eyes different from anything else that might be out there?
One thing that comes to mind just right off the bat is that I really try and keep run sizes small. I think our largest run's 1,000 tags. With the F100 and the RB57, the A37, a lot of stuff. Those runs could have been significantly larger, upwards of, you know, 5,000 plus. But I really like to keep the run small because I think there's more novelty in that. And yeah, I like keeping the rotation fresh and keeping things interesting. And so yeah, when a tag sells out, it sells out. And so yeah, I like keeping the run sizes smaller. I've also been reluctant to put really anything on the backs of the tags. It's something that I think the norm is to, you know, have, you know, a spot to really use them as like a luggage or a bag tag, and I think that's something that functionally they're great at. But for me, I've sort of left those fields, you know, off the back, because I sort of just in general have a very sort of minimalistic approach to the tags. I want them to have a more technical feel and put as little really on there, or etch as little as possible, and on the back just put simply the Jet Eyes logo. And I was even reluctant about that, but I wanted to sort of date stamp them, which we've been doing with the Roman numerals. And I try and keep them simple and toned down, and, you know, really laying into, you know, the blueprints and the etching there. And again, just only putting aircraft related stuff on there, really no extra. And so I love that about our tags. And then just the process, like I'd mentioned, right? Everything is done, you know, under this roof. Everything is shipped, you know, from here. And I think we're doing a great job of you know, communicating the technical aspect of airplanes, you know, and the design, but also having sort of fun elements as well, you know, like the card.
One of the favorite tags of mine is the Kestrel. For those that may not be familiar with the Harrier and the Kestrel and that whole kind of lineage, I think I got the order wrong there, but hoping maybe you could talk about that tag, because I think it's a really special one.
My interest in parts started with engines, jet engines, and I'm still just fascinated by them. I used to buy complete jet engines and take them apart by hand, and I found this Rolls-Royce Pegasus on Craigslist, and I contacted him. He's like, hey, I'll sell you the engine, but it comes with an airplane. I was like, well, I don't really want the airplane. This is before tags, and, you know, made him a deal. He's like, yeah, that's good. But again, the airplane's coming with the engine. And so this thing showed up on a flatbed trailer, and the guy actually got stuck. So our old house where we lived, and yeah, this thing was delivered to my house. Our old house, it was kind of an awkward turn, and he was in like a 40-foot flatbed. I don't know what he was thinking, and he got stuck blocking the road. I had a telehandler there that day. We had to lift his truck, the front of it, which was brand new, by the way. Anyway, we got on the property, and it sat, and we had like 3 acres at the time. So it wasn't like in a neighborhood, right? Like, I'm not that neighbor. But we offloaded it there, and, you know, the engine was like completely roached. So there's a lot of magnesium in that engine, and the stuff just like deteriorates. And so anyway, took the engine apart, and the airframe just sat there for a year plus. I even like ate lunch in the cockpit. I say cockpit, right? Like it was open, right? It wasn't like, I had to open the canopy or anything. My son was super young at the time. And so he just, that's a memory of his from, real little. And I learned the history of it. It was a, NASA bird, and the wings were off a different jet than the fuselage, but it flew together. And yeah, it sat in the driveway for a while and finally found a home for it in the UK at a museum where it's being restored. And that's the right answer. And so that's, again, one of those things that had I had here, that wouldn't have been, that wouldn't have been a tag, right? That's a good example, I think, of something we talked about earlier. But there was, like, early on in the process, there is some scrap pieces that a friend of mine who helped me, who's a Harrier pilot, offload it. I gave to him. They were just cut off the plane. And so, he came back to me and made tags out of them. Again, it was real limited run. I think 12 or 10, 11 or 12 or something, very, very limited, cut in our mill here. And it was cool that it was a plane that, we owned, cut here, and the cards were cool. So the cards were cut from, at some point, the plane was used at a paintball park as like something you'd hide behind. I'm not sure what the actual paintball term is, but prior to that, it was at a museum in Florida. And I believe the museum created a vertical stab because it was missing its vertical stab. And during some sort of static restoration project, a vertical stab was fabricated out of wood and sheet metal. And that came with the plane. And so the cards were cut from that skin from that faux vertical stabilizer, and we printed on those. And so, yeah, that tag is a pretty cool one. That's one of my favorite ones because I had a special history of the airplane. It's one my son knows about, and just love how it turned out too.
Okay, well, again, we're talking about unique airplanes, unique parts. I know the Globemaster, the C-17 was a really special one. What's the story there? That part, I got at a boneyard. And that was something I think I literally walked on many times. It was in this sort of pathway, but it was this flat piece of, carbon fiber and very, if you look at it, you wouldn't think anything of it. It was like broken up, but it was a large panel. I happened just to look at the data plate when I was there, and sure enough, I think the reason for that is I remember seeing, I went to this place in the wintertime, and winter times are better to go to the boneyards because like stuff isn't overgrown as much and you can see a lot more. And so I remember seeing like piece of carbon fiber, and I was like, that's weird, right? Because this is, not that carbon fiber is, some brand new material, but like a lot of the stuff there was like super old. Seeing carbon, that carbon fiber weave kind of caught my attention or caught my eye. And so I looked at the data plate and was like, wait, that's, C-17. And yeah, that was a good one. And so that was a good find. And there was these neat latch mechanisms we really tore into to create some neat sort of combo tags, with like multi-materials, like there'd be like composite and then, titanium or stainless or aluminum. And so, yeah, that was a surprise. And that was a cool one. And so, yeah, just a neat sort of thing that I had seen probably many times before at the boneyard, but never really took the time to examine. That's the thing about these places, you think you can go and get a pretty good idea, but every time you go back, you see something new and something fun. And so I love those trips. They're some of my favorite parts of the process. Sometimes when the timing is right, the timing is right. And so about a year ago when Top Gun Maverick came out, you paired the release of that movie with the release of a really special F-14 tag. What's the story behind that one? Yeah, Splinter was a Top Gun adversary jet. And yeah, just a neat F-14 that a friend of mine happened to have had those panels and, a collector. And so, yeah, that was a perfect timing with the movie coming out. And, the blue, that's rare. And so that was a neat one. That one sold out pretty quick. And even the design, kind of I don't want to say diamond, but it almost looks like a VFA patch that you would see on a guy's shoulder. Like everything was very deliberate about that tag, I think. Yeah, and we really, to go back to one of your earlier questions about what makes, Jedis different, the tag shapes or something, I think we have a lot of fun with. And so we save triangles for fighters. And that really comes from, my background as a Hawkeye pilot and some of the scope symbology, right? And I think that was a fun sort of thing we started doing this year. But yeah, earlier on, the triangles, they just work so well for fighters, and especially the Tomcat, right, with the wing sweep. And so, yeah, that was a cool one of my son's favorites as well. Well, there you go. As long as he's happy, the rest of us are happy too. I think you've checked out his collection. Like people ask, what tags do you keep? And really, they end up on his wall anyway. So, it's not something that you're looking around, there's not a tag hanging up where we're talking because, they get taken from me. And so, and that's cool. Obviously that I'm happy about that. Right. But, anyway, that was one of his favorite. One of my favorites, in addition to the SR that I have, is the U2. And it's not just, a piece of the airplane, it's a piece of the canopy itself. I like to think of that U2 pilot that looked through that and, God, good Lord, what did he see? And imprinted on it is a little bit of a Cuban Missile Crisis heritage. Again, absolutely love the design, but what's the story behind that one?
With those canopy tags, and the U2 canopy tag in particular is neat because, there's this painted area, right? That's unique as far as canopies go. And so yeah, we come across a couple of U2s, an earlier one and then the most recent, the R variant. And so from a canopy standpoint, they cut a little bit better than some of the other stuff for some reason. Couldn't tell you why, but love working with the material. With the canopy tags, the clear ones, we really try and put some element of, either the card art or some historical, image, on the tag as well to communicate its history. And given the era, of that particular jet, that was, obviously a pretty important historical event. And the U2 played a big role in it. And so, yeah, I was really happy with how that tag turned out.
So we talked earlier about kind of iterating on a good thing, making something new and special. What are X tags?
I come across stuff, all kinds of material. From a tag run standpoint, you have to decide, at some point you have to draw a line with, how few of these, right, can you make? And X tags are cut from smaller pieces of really neat, airplanes. It just was too good not to tag, in my opinion. And so I take the opportunity to really lay into the design and change things up a little bit and really, change the tag shape and some of the elements, of the cards and, really lay into them. And so they're a more premium product, but, it's something that, like, we just did a Concorde, part of an interior component, and it's Concorde, and the part in of itself, wasn't particularly special, but it's off a neat jet and it wasn't very big. And I thought we could do a good job at really, communicating just the majesty of that plane, and we happened to have found this, one of the publications which had a picture of it. And so it turned out really well. I was super happy with it. And so the X tags are, again, just an opportunity for us to utilize these smaller pieces, and we don't tell people what they're buying. They're advertised, it's the only information given are the tag shapes, which again, they can use to assess, like mission type. If it's a triangle, it's a fighter, but then I also do these custom shapes. And so, and then I'll add a little bit of info in the description to kind of, I recognize, these are going to be an investment, right? And so I don't want to, I want to give people a little bit of info, but also make them kind of fun. And so, yeah, the X tags are kind of a newer thing, and, I'm having fun with them. They're the tags that I probably get the most excited about because, they're smaller, they'll be done, relatively quick and sold out. It's the tags I can experiment with and do things and have some fun with. And so, yeah, I really, really enjoy them.
Glad you mentioned Concorde. And so far, we've kind of talked a lot about military aircraft. Is there anything maybe in the future, maybe you could tease a little bit of anything with civil aircraft that we might potentially see more of from you next?
Yeah, as far as teasing future stuff goes, I mean, right now you're sitting next to a piece of B-58, right? And so, that's cool. I'm excited about that one. The civil stuff is certainly an interest of mine, given that I've flown a bunch of commercial stuff and, the 747. And so I have that connection there. My Jedi has just turned into something where I was, it's basically a military aircraft, and got to the point where I just felt like, I needed to own that. And, that was the material I was sourcing. That's where my interests were. The civil commercial stuff, I do miss it. I am excited to get into that material in the future. And another part of that really went back to what I was mentioning earlier about, material and sourcing it and so on and so forth. I'm just working through some of that. So no, I don't know if I'm done with that, but it's certainly still an interest of mine and leaving the doors open there. But yeah, we do military tags, and we have some neat stuff coming out this year. Again, the Hustler is one of them. Some black airplanes, Harrier, Mustang, English Electric, Lightning, famous airplanes too, not just, the types, but the specific, serial numbers, are pretty well known. And this year is going to be crazy. I'm looking forward to it.
The Lightning, man, I'm excited about that. We'll have to talk about that offline, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it.
Maybe art is the wrong term for these tags and the designs, but I really think it truly is art, and it's very personal. Everyone kind of has their own special vision. Yours is, I think, very clear if you look at the tags and how they've changed over time as well. But where does that inspiration come from, right?
It comes from the airplanes, the aircraft themselves. So from the tag standpoint, I try and keep them as simple as possible. I don't want to put extra stuff on the tags. I want the tags to have a very sort of technical, sterile, almost like an ATOPS diagram. And so I'm very minimal with what I put on there, and that's intentional. And then also choosing frontal art, and some airplanes I think need to be displayed from the front. I think the A-10 is one of them, the KC-135. We did a Cobra tag, which looks great. And so we've been doing a lot of top down. I think by and large capture the essence of the airplane better. Do we just did a Prowler tag, you would have completely missed that extra, like back seat, right? Had you done that from the front. Regardless, right? We pick the view, I think, that captures the essence of the airplane best. And then again, from the cards, that's done by some super talented artists that I'm super honored to work with. And then working through, again, going back to the airplane, telling the story, if we know the serial number and the history of that airplane, that goes a long way as far as, communicating that visually, in the card art. And the artists, do an incredible job at making making sure that every last detail is covered down to loadout and, and antennas. And then another thing we've done recently is the cards are so important to me. I created these card guards, which, some of our tags are so beefy and heavy, right? In shipment, they would just, beat up the cards, and I didn't like that. And so created just basically using a piece of like premium cardstock, cutting those in-house, and then printing like the diagram we use on the etching onto this extra sort of, piece of cardstock that sits in between the tag and the card, and sort of protect it in travel. And that's styled after the scramble handle cover on a SR-71 with the text and everything. And so those are kind of a neat addition. But yeah, to answer your question, the inspiration comes from the airplane. That's just as much from a tag standpoint as it is from a card standpoint. And so yeah, I don't have an agenda going into them, just sort of work out what the best way is to communicate the history and the feel of that airplane.
Ryan, I think one of the beauties of naval aviation, definitely carrier aviation, your background, is that you always want feedback, right? You always want to, we say goods and others, right? What'd you do well? What do you want to work on? What are some goods and others for Jedis?
I'm always looking for, ways to improve. And if you ask the people that are, close to me that, are sort of in this tag world, I'm always asking, what can we do to improve? And, I also take, kind of a hands-off approach to, there's the Jedi's, collectors group. And, I read the content in there, but I also want that to be a place that people can kind of be critical, right? And not feel like, it doesn't hurt my feelings, right? I truly want to know what people want out of Jedis. Like, I'm not making these tags, right? For me, I want people to enjoy them, and I want to know how we can do better. And so feedback is always welcome. And if you're listening and you have an idea, shoot me an email, right? Ryan@jedis.com, and let me know how I can improve. That's always, super welcome. And so, yeah, thanks for asking.
Well, again, talking about things to be excited about, Tag Force, again, something brand new. Talk about a beautiful design, beautiful thought process. Talk us through that.
So Tag Force was an idea I had maybe a year and a half ago or so, and born out of sort of just some of the neat material, some of the stuff you come across at the boneyards, and also wanted to tell the story of other sort of aspects of the military, right? It's not just airplanes and pilots and flight officers and whatnot. And so yeah, I've been buying the stuff, and there's going to be some incredible things that don't really fit under the scope of Jedis, and I can't say enough about how excited I am. And these are going to be Jedis is it's manned military aircraft, and Tag Force is going to be basically everything else. And when it comes to missiles and ordnance and trucks and tanks and other types of vehicles, and approaching it from a military government surplus standpoint, not maybe necessarily just specifically a vehicle standpoint or a missile standpoint. And I'm finding some really neat stuff out there, and even some space stuff, and I'm super excited about it. Yeah, I know.
Space stuff.
Yeah, I'm stoked.
Man,
awesome. I have some neat stuff I'm looking forward to getting out there, and they're going to be released in series. Not just you can buy one tag at a time, but also I really wanted to make it a unique experience to Jedis. I didn't just want to use the same cards. I wanted to completely sort of reinvent the wheel. And so the shape is different. The cards are different. Everything is different about it. Again, I just didn't want to simply just rebrand something I was doing. I wanted to create an entirely new project. And yeah, I just wanted to have its own sort of unique feel, and not a Jedi's product, but there's just some really neat stuff out there. And I really want to tell the story of that material and the folks who operate it.
For folks that don't know, I guess one of the great privileges I've had of being here in Pensacola and knowing you, HQ for Jedis is pretty close to where I've been flying my little RV6, my little airplane. And one of the great joys is flying in the local area here, looking down and seeing what incredible tags are coming next, right? Seeing some of the aircraft that arrive. The reason I mention that is I get a unique insight into what you do. One of the cool things before we decide to sit down and do the second interview is you kind of open the door to some of the folks that collect these great tags and said, hey, what do you want to ask? What do you want to know about Jedis in the process? So I think we got a couple questions. Going to start on those next. So William asked, some discussion on the logistics of running Jedis would be very interesting. What goes on during a release week versus an off week? How much time does it take to cut material, design the tag, card, etc.?
That's a great question. I think we touched on a little bit of that already, but the lineup's always changing. Right? I could tell you right now the lineup for this year, which I have down, but it's going to change, right? As new stuff comes up, like, oh yeah, I want to do that, right? And so we'll bump something. And so release week, I always think there's going to be downtime and there's not, but my schedule right now is I'm up at 4:30 every day. And that's not to like fall on my sword or anything. That just is the schedule. I wake up pretty early and get started. Again, it just depends on the day and the material, right? Some material is easier to work with. Sometimes we'll get ahead and cut material early. I wouldn't say that any particular week, there's very little wash, rinse, repeat. But generally speaking, with a tag release, we'll cut the material for, process the material and cut it first. And then once, the material is cut, sort out the run size, and then, work on the etching and in the background, the card art is being made. If I don't already have it, we'll get the cards, cut cut, ready to go, and start printing those quite a bit earlier before the release. And then once the tags are cut, start working on the etching. And that takes a long time getting the etching dialed in because, the laser and the paints, every paint color is different. And, some airplanes have multiple layers of paint. And what you don't want to do is burn or melt the paint, but you also can't take forever, burning through it as well. And so every line has to be, I'm very weird about the etching and making sure, it's dialed in and, everything's where it needs to be, along those same lines as well. We've been doing these, top down, I think, etchings, because or at least the view of the aircraft, because I think that conveys for most airplanes the shape or the personality best. But some airplanes, I think the A-10, the KC-135, those airplanes need to be more frontal view. It's making those decisions, and then how it displays on the tags, working through, am I going to, etch this or print it, and getting those files ready to go. But the etching, and getting that worked out takes quite a while. As release day approaches, just getting, photos taken and, the email written and how I want to announce it. And, and then we now make these videos every week. The emails are just, difficult to write and really convey in detail what each variant is. And so now I make these videos that will kind of go through every variant and talk about color options and what they look like on the front, on the back, and those types of details. And then after release week, getting them shipped and then moving on to the next one every 2 weeks.
I love this one. Okay, Joe asks, what would be your unicorn tag? All aircraft, spacecraft types included, could be a specific unique aircraft as well.
So I have two. The first would be the X-15. I mean, I just don't have the material. If I did, again, I couldn't cut it up, right? So it's a unicorn tag in the sense that if I had a piece of the X-15, I simply wouldn't do anything to it. It's a tag I want to own, I guess, is be a way to frame that. And then, the favorite airplane question, right? A tag I really want to make, I've just never been able to find, and I haven't really looked that hard, but I have some great contacts in the UK who are constantly digging stuff up for me. It would be the Westland Lysander. It's a cool airplane. I just love the mission set and I love everything about it and I love the way it looks. And so, yeah, the Lysander would be, of the things that I would want to release, that's probably number one.
Okay, well, if anyone has any connections, it's ryan@jedis.com, I think.
That's right.
Let you know.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mason asks, how did you get started and how someone could start, i.e. sourcing materials, cutting tags to size, etching, etc.?
When Jedi started to grow, it became pretty clear I needed a bigger space. And so we started looking sort of out in town at renting sort of an industrial space to operate out of and came across this warehouse. It was for sale and it was on some property and 5,000 square foot, all the sort of power requirements and just the infrastructure alone to operate some of this equipment it needs to be sort of baked in. It would be significant expense to add it after the fact. And so we found this large warehouse on this piece of property that we ended up purchasing. We had started working with builders and decided to build a house out here as well. And so really unique in the sense that we have this industrial space that's on the property in which we live to do what we were doing, early on with the window tags, right? Like there's not a whole lot of infrastructure involved, but to do what we're doing now is 3-phase power and with the correct water requirements and all kinds of other stuff. And so I think it just depends on the scope and how big or what someone's, I think goals and ambitions are, like I think we started in a garage and I think, a lot of neat companies do. I had mentioned earlier that we make everything in-house and that comes with, there's significant investments involved, right, in the machinery and the equipment and then keeping it running as well.
Okay, William asks, what's the most difficult part? Actually, William's got a couple questions. What's the most difficult part of the process? How long does it take to make one tag from the time it's cut, post-processed, and lasered? What's your most desired tag? And finally, what's the next most requested tag that hasn't been released yet?
So we get a lot of questions about the F-117 tag and also, as far as requested tags go, B-58 is real high up there as well. Harrier's up there. And happy to report we got all those coming this year. I'm excited about those. What's the most difficult part of the process? Sometimes it's cutting. If the material's super tricky, sometimes it's the etch and the laser work. It just depends on the tag, really. I would say the most tedious part is the etching and getting that right and getting the settings dialed in. You don't just turn the laser on and upload the file and etch it. Like there's different ways you're going to hatch it and sort it. Yeah, it just takes a lot of time. And again, it's time consuming. It's back and forth from the laser to the computer and editing little lines here and there to make sure that they etch correctly because some of the thicker lines will etch differently than the thinner lines. And you want everything to look the same. That's a tedious part of it. So how long does it take to make one tag from the time it's cut, post-processed to lasered? Our workflow is such that we do everything in sort of bulk movements or big movements. So I'll cut everything. That's days. And then we'll work the edges. Some of the tags need to be polished, some don't. It just depends on the material. And then, with some of the tags, the laser etching goes super quick. If the paint's easier to work with, sometimes the paint takes like significantly longer. Some of the reds and oranges, especially if there's like glossy components of the paint for whatever reason, it just seems to really be difficult to work through. And we have a higher power laser as well. And so, yeah, it really just depends on the tag. Again, if I had to make a single tag, and again, our workflow is not so much making one at a time, but to make a single tag, yeah, that's a really hard question to answer. And I don't know
It depends. I think that's what
it just depends. Yeah, it just depends.
Okay, Mike asks, what's the most fun part of the process for y'all?
I mean, hunting, right? I love that part because you don't know. When you get it back here and you start making the tags, like I know what our tags are going to look like. Obviously, you don't know exactly, but finding the material, that's what dictates the releases. And that's sort of the unboxing part for me. And then I mentioned getting the card art from the artist is super fun as well. The first thing I do, if I don't have a card like ready to go to print, is I'll just print it off on like our office printer and just see how it looks with one of the tags, right? But yeah, finding the material and then for the first time, like bringing the tag and card together is super fun.
Randy asks, what's your favorite adversary airplane?
MiG-25, the Foxbat. I just love it. Huge. I love what it was designed for. I think it was made out of steel by and large. And yeah, just the stories about, how we got our hands on one and then really laid into it and we're kind of shocked. So yeah, I just always love the Foxbat.
Do you think that's a tag you'll ever get to make?
I hope. That would be cool. I don't have any MiG-25 out on the farm here, so.
So I know there's a lot of interest, obviously, in the tags and the process. Has anyone ever wanted to come by and check out the workshop and kind of see how you do things in person?
Yeah, I've certainly gotten requests, and a few folks have been by to check things out. And we just recently moved out here. I say recently, but it's been a process, getting the workshop, or the warehouse, up and running. And so, yeah, if people want to come check it out, the other thing I'm just sort of mindful of is we do live out here, right? And so, there aren't really operating hours for people just to show up. So certainly something you just need to reach out to me, but I'm happy to entertain people if they want to come, check out how we do things. It'd be a neat thing to share with people. And then the folks that come out here and checked it out, yeah, I think they had a good time and showed them around and got to see some stuff that, I just don't talk about or show through our sort of regular channels.
There's a lot of behind the scenes, a lot of intrigue. I think that's, again, some of the cool part about Jedis is the stuff that's coming in the future. I'm privileged. I get to know a couple of the little behind the scene things. And yeah, man, just I can tell how much you love it. I know how much passion and how much energy goes into this project, and sharing it with others I know is a big part of that. So that's awesome. I'm glad hopefully folks can maybe reach out, and if they want to come by and see the setup, it's worth the trip. I'll just say it that way.
Awesome. No, I appreciate it.
So Ryan, something I know you have a lot of, you care very deeply about the heritage, and you're talking about the 80s and the 90s and the way things were back then versus the way things are now. Something that's kind of new in vogue is a lot of times manufacturers will send out a sample of a product to someone for a review, right? It's kind of trading that thing for nice words about that thing. Is that something you're ever going to do? Is that something you see yourself doing in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's actually something I've been asked before. I've been contacted by some folks, on social media looking to, swap tags, right, for reviews and that kind of stuff. And, from a business standpoint, right, you have to promote your product, right? But at the same time, I want the people, who are investing and collecting them to be the ones, writing the reviews and, and to be honest in those reviews, right? And so it goes back to looking for feedback. We had talked about how can we improve our product, and to barter tags for exposure. I guess that's like a world we live in now, right? But it also, I'm not sure how I feel about it. I'd rather, again, let the folks who are buying them, right, make the decision and talk about them if they choose to do so. And there's absolutely zero pressure to talk about these on social media or Facebook. Again, as a business owner, you love people promoting your product, but I want those promotions to be genuine and to come from the heart. And I want that to be an honest transaction and nothing else behind the scenes.
It's been wonderful to sit down and hear some of these stories. It's something I wanted to talk about the first time, but I'm glad we did a second podcast dedicated to Jedis and all these wonderful things. Number one, I am a customer myself. I highly encourage folks to check out the website. And then there's the email list. It is so fun every time I see the email to see what's next, what's the new tag that's coming up. And I just feel like each one is better than the last. So I'm personally very excited to see where everything goes. But again, thank you. Like I said, gratitude is how we end all these. Thank you for taking so much time. Thanks for showing me the operation, kind of getting to the behind the scenes. It's been truly fascinating. You get the last word. So anything I didn't ask, anything we didn't talk about, over to you.
Thank you. This has been a lot of fun. I've been looking forward to this chat since the last one, and we tried to make it happen a few different times. And so I'm super grateful for you for wanting to talk, and I'm looking forward to people listening to it. I don't think I have a ton to add. I'm excited about the future, our tags this year. The lineup is looking incredible, and I'm excited about Tag Force, which is part of like a larger project we're working on, and seeing where that goes, and just continuing to tell the story of this material in the form of these tags, and it's something that I think what I love about it most is, my interest. I'm very very technical person. Like I love design, or I love engineering, and I love the machining aspect of what we're doing here, but I also love design. I love art, and I love creating, and I love airplanes. And I think Jedis is the intersection of all those things, right? So that's cool. And I think that's why it resonates with me so well and why I love it so much. And so, no, I'm super grateful to everyone who follows us and the people who decide to buy a tag. You've no idea how much it means to us. And so, no, I really appreciate your time, and thanks for chatting.
Made in America by a great American family. What better way to end it than that? Thanks, as always, for taking the time and tuning in to Safe on Deck. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It shouldn't need to be said, but just in case, I'll say it. The views and opinions presented on Safe on Deck are my own and those of my guests, and do not represent the official policy or position of the Department of Defense, the Department of the Navy, or its components. Be well, blue skies, and fly safe out there. See you next time. PC idle, wings level. Clear, we're safe on deck.